Welcome to Live the Dream with yours truly, Marty Kaiser. Buckle up and let's get started. Happy Friday, everyone. This is Marty Kaiser with our Friday edition of Real Estate Tidbits. Hope everyone's having a great week. It looks like we might be having a wet few days, so keep an eye on the forecast and take an umbrella when you need it. Today I'm going to go over a few things. I'm going to start with as I always do, talk about the Hunters Creek market and some statistical data. In my last podcast last week, I mentioned that I was curious to see how July sales of 2026 compared to 2025 sales. So let me give you a couple of comparisons that I thought were quite interesting. In 2026, which was obviously this past month, we had 12 sales in Hunters Creek of single-family homes, ranging in price from $302 to $830. In July of last year, 2025, we had 15 homes for sale. So we actually had over a 20% decrease in July, which was surprising a little bit. The sold prices last year at this time were $385 to $679, $999. Now, the statistic that really stood out to me was the listing inventory. As I've been mentioning on most of my podcasts for a few months, listing inventory, for the most part, it's been increasing. You know, every once in a while you'll see a flat week or something that is a little bit off center, but for the most part, we've had consistent increases. Well, interestingly, from 30 days ago to now, of listings in Hunters Creek of single-family homes, we had a large decrease. As of this morning, we have 42 homes for sale in Hunters Creek, ranging from $370,000 to $875. Last month in Hunters Creek, which the date that I used was July 13th, so that was actually just under 4 weeks ago, we had 55 homes for sale, ranging in price from $369,900 to $900. So what was quite interesting and almost amazing, if I can say, is that the decrease we had was approximately 30% over a 4-week period. And that's a very large decrease. I can't really say what it's attributed to, if it was just kind of a 1-month glitch or whatever the case may be. So obviously I'll be keeping a close eye on that 30 days from now. But that was the largest 1-week deviation I've seen in a long time. So we'll just have to wait and see. You know, the markets right now, as I've mentioned, they're more of a neutral market in a lot of the country, and not just in Florida. Some pockets are stronger than others, but for the most part, they're somewhat level, and the business has been somewhat predictable. The thing that's been more erratic, as I've mentioned, is all the external circumstances we have, meaning that, the war in Iran and all its turbulence, and, now it's come out that, of course, our weapons system is way below what it should be, because we've expended so many of our weapons in the months that this war has been going on. But we get conflicting news all the time. We're nearing a peace treaty, we're going to bomb. It goes from one extreme to the other, and it happens theoretically in very short 24 to 48-hour news cycles. So when it comes to the economy and real estate, it definitely can affect consumer behavior, because you can't have a lot of confidence in the direction of these different areas. Now, one thing in the real estate market that has been pretty evident from the articles that are published and the statistical data is that the new home market has suffered. where the resale market has been, for the most part, pretty consistent and pretty level. The single-family new construction market has continually been more challenged. And in fact, in June of 2025, compared to June of this year, single-family housing starts were down 3.25%. And one of the databases that I look at is the Wells Fargo Housing Market Index marked its 27th consecutive month of negative builder sentiment in July. So basically, what you can definitely say in the new home market is that it's struggled. It's definitely in one of the lower points it's been for a few years. So if you're the kind of person that likes new construction, now is a good time to buy a new home, because you're going to be able to get a lot more builder incentives, both in terms of interest rate buy downs and having more negotiating power, especially on homes that are complete or near complete. Usually the builders want to get rid of that type of inventory. They don't want to have it in their bookkeeping. So that's a good time to strike while the iron's hot. Now, new homes are still going to be more expensive than pre-owns, but all things relative, you're going to get more bang for your buck if you buy a new home now than if you had tried to do this a few years ago. So just keep that in mind, because I work with three types of customers basically when it comes to purchasers. We work with people that are looking for pre-owned homes for a couple reasons. Number one, they're less expensive than new homes. Number two, they might have more specific locational requirements, whether it's work commute time or whether it's the school system that a particular community is zoned for, where they may not be able to find that same package of options along with a price point that they're comfortable with. So that may eliminate new homes for a certain type of segment. For example, I use Hunters Creek a lot, and that's a popular area for exactly those two reasons I mentioned. The schools are popular, and the commuting choices are very convenient to a lot of different areas. But if you were looking for new construction, there are no new homes that give you that combination of factors. So if you wanted the Hunters Creek amenities, so to speak, in terms of location, commute times, and schools, pre-owns are your only option. So those are just some things to keep in mind. One thing about certain builders have had more foresight than others. So certain builders over the years have done more land banking. And so for those builders that have done that, they've been in a stronger position because they acquired their land when prices were more reasonable, so they could bake that into their marketing and pricing strategy. Where builders that have only acquired land as they needed it, a lot of times their acquisition cost for the land is higher, so it limits what price points they're going to be at. So it's interesting just to compare these two market segments. Some other things that are clear is that our foreign buyers have purchased fewer U.S. homes over the past year. So by comparison, the foreign market has definitely been weaker compared to the past, as opposed to what we refer to as our domestic purchasers. Because domestic purchasers are driven by need as much as anything else. So when it's time to buy for whatever reason, they want to own, they're ready to move up, their kids are going to school, so they want to get into a certain school system. They have more intrinsic factors that direct them, where for foreign buyers, to a large degree, it's a little bit more of an elective purchase, because a large segment of foreign buyers maybe are looking for investment properties, or they're looking for second or vacation homes. So some of these external factors can affect them, whether it's not necessarily just affordability, but all the turbulence we have overseas, the immigration rhetoric that we have going on for the last couple of years. Those things all affect foreign buyers. Also our tariffs, because it's put us at odds with some of our allies, such as Canada and France. So it's interesting. It's a little disconcerting because there's a lot more turbulence or volatility with these things. But these are just some things to keep an eye on. There's usually a lot of good statistical data from reliable sources. Another source that I always like to use, which I feel their information is pretty accurate, is homes.com. So if you go into homes.com sites, you'll see some very useful information from them as well. So I'm going to transition a little bit now to what I believe is an underutilized topic in real estate. One of my favorite things, actually, and one of the things that I think should be a key consideration of a real estate consumer, regardless of whether you're going to be a seller or a buyer. And that's negotiation skills and strategy. And what do I mean by that, and why do I think it's underutilized? Well, if you think about real estate marketing and what is generated to attract customers, obviously, if you're selling a home, you're going to advertise the merits of that home. You're going to put forth professional photography. And you're just going to do things that make that listing create demand for it, whether it's the location of the property, whether it's got a premium lot location, whether it's got a brand new roof, or whatever the case may be. You're trying to put out as many positive features of that home as you can to attract buyers. And then if you're trying to attract sellers as an agent, in some fashion, you're marketing yourself. Why should a particular seller contact you? And so you may use some of the attributes that you've sold a bunch of homes in the area, that you've had a lot of experience in the marketplace, that you work with a high-profile real estate brokerage. Whatever the reasons are, but they're in some fashion, they're promoting the merits of what you're trying to communicate to a potential seller. But however, one thing that's very little communicated from what I can see, both in terms of what is marketed, and then when I go on appointments with sellers and I chat with them, and besides going over what I'm going to present to them as information about why I'm going to do a superior job for them, I try to find out a little bit about what they've heard, if they've interviewed other agents, things they liked, things they didn't like, etc. And one of the things that never comes up that they mention about other agents is negotiating skills. And that's probably, unfortunately for a lot of consumers, it's not something they think about. And it's really an important component for the realtor that's going to represent your interest. And it doesn't matter whether you're on the buying side or the selling side. Negotiations are negotiations, and they're definitely a skill set. And there's a big difference in negotiation skill. I can tell you that because when I sell a house or when I help a buyer buy a house, we negotiate on each transaction, and I get a really good feel for the type of negotiations we're in and how skilled or lack of skill the agent on the other side has. So let me give you an idea of what my philosophy is about negotiations and why I think I'm a very good negotiator. Number one, I try to use the win-win philosophy. And what I mean by that is, at the end of the negotiation, everybody should have a positive taste in their mouth. It doesn't mean that each person made out equally, but it means that at the end of the transaction, when the ownership of the home has changed hands, both parties feel positively about the experience. And I kind of correlate this a little bit to a car buying experience. And the car buying experience is a lot different, obviously, than real estate. And when you're buying a car, you really shouldn't think of it as an investment, because a car is one item that depreciates as soon as you become an owner of it. Where real estate, hopefully if you've made a smart purchase, is going to increase in value at the longer that you own it. So they're not equivalent at all with that. But the reason I use this analogy is that when you go into a car dealership, they work on a lot of psychological techniques. And think about your experience when you went to buy a car, specifically a new car. You had several things in mind, I'm sure. Number one, did the car have a good reputation? Number two, did you like the looks of the car? And number three, of course, you were probably looking for a certain price range of vehicles. But what the dealerships always try to do, and especially for the people that are not as experienced in buying cars, they try to not talk about the sticker price of the car, but when they get into negotiations with you, they want to talk about the monthly payment. So one of the questions they'll ask you when you sit down is, well, what type of monthly payment are you looking for? What are you comfortable spending each monthly on a car purchase? So that's the worst question that you can answer as a buyer. Reason being is, once you give the salesman a price, well, they can tailor the type of financing they put you into that price. So the longer that they stretch out your financing, the lower they can make your car payment. Well, that's not in your best interest in most cases, because the longer that your car payment is, it means that you have a longer time period to not be upside down in the car. And what upside down means is that if you went to trade a car in, maybe you'd owe as much or more than when you bought it. So you want to get out of that mindset. But at the end of the day, with a car purchase, it truly isn't whether you got a good value on the car. It's whether you left there thinking you had a good value. So it's really psychological. And I'm using that psychology into the real estate business to a little bit lesser degree, but you want to try to make it an enjoyable experience for people, and they leave there with a favorable impression in negotiations. One of the things I always try to do is, on probably 80% of the transactions I'm involved in, there's an agent on the other side of the table that represents the other party. So if I'm representing the seller, the other agent's representing the buyer, or of course, if I'm representing the buyer, the other agent's representing the seller. But I always try to do it as much as I can in a non-adversarial fashion. I don't believe adversarial negotiation is effective, because it puts you at odds with the other party, and it's typically counterproductive. And I apologize for this in advance, but I'll correlate that, even though I said I would never talk about politics, to our current negotiating posture in the war. It's based on threats and inconsistencies, and they just are ineffective. People don't like being threatened when they're negotiating, and they like to have some reliability, predictability, and consistency, of which we've done a horrible job, especially in this last war, of doing that. But in real estate, the first thing to do is try to do it in a professional manner. Obviously, when I'm representing, let's say, a seller, it's my job to get them the highest price I can. with the most favorable terms to the seller. However, those two components are going to vary somewhat in each transaction. And what do I mean by that? Well, I may have a seller that needed to sell immediately, so the dynamics of that negotiation may change. I also may have a seller that's selling a house in a neighborhood that's not a real strong market, so I have to represent their interests differently. For example, if I was representing a seller 3 years ago, I took a far more aggressive approach on behalf of the seller because it was a seller's market. So we had a lot of positives and a lot of leverage. So, it was just that if you were a buyer in that situation, you were going to have to be more flexible. Right now, because we're in more of a neutral transitional market, each transaction is its own entity, and you have to be a little bit more flexible and not go in with as many preconceived notions. And so that varies quite a bit. On the flip side, if you're representing a buyer, how much does that buyer really want the home or need the home? And I'll use an easy example. Let's say you're with a real particular buyer and you've shown them multiple homes, and they just haven't really found anything that really gets them excited about it. And then you take them into one home and they love the home. Well, you have to take that into account when you negotiate, because maybe you'll have them pay a little bit more because it's a one-of-a-kind home, and you know that they're very particular, and they're not going to find another home possibly that they like nearly as much, and they may be looking for a long time, and they may not find anything they really fall in love with. So you have to use that into your thought process and how you approach that negotiation. Now, one of the things that a top-notch agent does, besides the things that I've mentioned, is they should have done a lot of research. And research can be in a few forms. Number one, what's the history of that property? If you're representing a buyer, how long has that seller owned the home? How long has that home been on the market? What did the seller pay for that home? What is approximately the seller's mortgage balance if they have one? How many homes are for sale in that neighborhood? What's the average days on the market? What kind of condition is the home in? You're going to use all these things when you guide your buyer. And so that's why I mentioned that each negotiation is its own entity. And you're going to do the same thing for the seller. The other thing that's more of a subtle thing is trying to get a good feel and understanding of the agent on the other side of the table. How strong an agent is that agent? What type of ego does that agent have? How well does the agent know the area? How many transactions has the agent been involved in? These are things that I always try to do research about so that I have a better understanding of who's on the other side of the table. As you've heard from me talking on another podcast previously, facts and knowledge are so crucial to whatever you're doing. And so the more information that I have about that agent, the more effectively I'm going to be able to negotiate with them and benefit my customer. So, these are all subtleties that not everybody thinks of, but they're so important, because when I get into a negotiation, I have multiple goals and objectives. But the first one is to make it a successful negotiation. Like when a seller hires me, they want me to sell their home. So they don't want me to let ego get in the way. And they don't want me being an ineffective negotiator where A, I either cost them money, or B, maybe I blow the sale out of the water because I do things that are counterproductive in the negotiation. So those things are very important. I also try to derive as much as I can what the buyer's motivation is. What kind of personality the buyer has. Is the buyer currently renting, or does the buyer own? So these are all things that factor into how effective I am. And I take pride in getting the best result for my customer, and I try to do it in a stress-free manner. Obviously, I try to not only educate my customer, but I try to keep them informed on every part of the interaction or the negotiations. I try to, obviously, I want my customer's input. Now, sometimes the customer may have what I consider a little bit of an unrealistic approach to the negotiations, and it's my job in a pleasant, non-confrontational manner with my customer to kind of explain them why it may be to their benefit to look at things a little differently. So there's a lot of things that go on in negotiations, and a lot of it's psychology. And you, like I said, at the end of the day, you want everybody to feel good about what is taking place. So I put a lot of emphasis on negotiations. And when I do meet a customer and they say, well, why should I hire you, Marty? Well, one of the things that I talk about, which they probably haven't heard much about, is my negotiating skills. And I feel very comfortable and confident in telling my customers that I'm going to do a top quality job on their behalf. So that's a little bit about negotiations. So after this podcast, think about your experiences in negotiation, not only in the real estate business, but think about how you've bought a car in the past, and have you changed your approach to buying a car at all? The one thing with both real estate and buying a car is that it's a little easier to get factual information if you're the consumer, because it's easier to acquire that with all the databases that are out there, whereas 15, 20 years ago, you didn't have access to nearly as much information. In fact, a lot of people complain we have information overload nowadays, which is somewhat true. So you have to really think about what are the best ways for you to derive accurate and complete information. So that's a little bit about negotiations for today. So I hope that's proved interesting for you. And that's all for today. Everybody, if you do go outdoors this weekend, keep an eye out on the weather forecast. If it's got rain, take an umbrella with you. If it's going to be one of our hot, humid days, stay hydrated. And also, before I forget, we did start our new sports podcast. I think I mentioned last week. We're airing the sports podcast on Tuesday. And we usually will have them posted by mid-afternoon Tuesday. And so far, our first two podcasts, I think have gone, I've been happy with them. We hope to keep them on an upscale level and improving. And our podcast name again is Marty K's Unfiltered Sports Takes. And I'll try to limit that one to about a half hour as well. And we're going to try to have the topics be interesting and topical. So that's all for today. This is Marty Kaiser out.